Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The illuminated gardens of Atlanta's Grand Regency Hotel looked like something out of a fairy tale. Arches adorned with white roses lined a red carpet, leading to a reception hall whose magnificence dazzled every guest. Luxury cars still streamed past the entrance, pouring men in tuxedos and women in shimmering gowns. It was the wedding of the century, that of Chadwick Moore, heir to a colossal fortune, and Samantha Miller, from an influential high society family. Inside, laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses mingled with the sound of a string quartet. The diners, almost all of them the cream of the white elite, displayed their characteristic blend of pride and arrogance. They talked about their businesses, their travels, their investments, sometimes casting a disdainful glance at the waiters who circulated between the tables. Among this unassuming staff was Michael Johnson, 27. Tall, slender, with a calm but profound gaze, he worked tirelessly, carrying trays filled with champagne and petit fours. He had long learned to endure the hurtful remarks, the condescending smiles, and the haughty looks. Tonight, however, he already felt something was going wrong. As he crossed the room, an elegant guest, adorned with sparkling jewels, stopped him with a sharp gesture. "Hey, you! Bring me another drink. And faster than that, boy." Michael nodded politely, without answering, accustomed to this tone. But at another table, a young man, the groom's cousin, sneered and pointed at him. "Look at that, even in a prestigious place, they hire anyone. It's almost like a ghetto fast food restaurant." The hearty laughter of his friends echoed, attracting the attention of several guests. Michael clenched his jaw, maintaining his composure. He had learned not to answer back. But this time, the humiliation wouldn't end there. In the shadow of the glittering chandeliers, a cruel trap was being prepared. A trap that, without knowing it, would reveal to the entire assembly who the waiter they thought they could trample on really was. The reception was in full swing. Champagne was flowing, guests were laughing heartily, and the dance floor was rocking to the sounds of a classical orchestra. Michael, tray in hand, moved between the tables, trying to remain invisible while remaining attentive to every guest's every move. At a table near the stage where the married couple sat, a small group of wealthy young men were chatting loudly. They were Chadwick Moore's cousins, known for their arrogance. Among them, Brian, a blonde with a smirk, and Ethan, a smug air, were scrutinizing Michael like a predator observes its prey. "Hey, waiter," Brian shouted loudly, attracting the attention of several guests. "Did I ask your tray as slow as you? Bring us some drinks before we die of thirst." Laughter erupted around the table. Michael, impassive, nodded and moved closer. But no sooner had he placed a glass in front of them than Ethan swatted it away. The liquid spilled onto the immaculate tablecloth. "Look what you did, idiot," he said with a cruel smile. "You're only good at cleaning, right?" The scene drew stares. Some guests, uncomfortable, looked away, preferring not to intervene. Others snickered, amused by the spectacle. Michael, his jaw clenched, calmly took a napkin from his apron and wiped away the stain. But Brian, eager to humiliate him further, slapped him on the shoulder, as if talking to a dog. "Come on, good boy. You're doing well. Maybe afterward you can sing something for us. You can sing, right? Like in the old movies?" The laughter grew louder. Michael felt the weight of every glance directed at him, a mixture of contempt and morbid curiosity. Yet he remained silent. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to humiliate him. But tonight, in this gilded room where everything seemed perfect, he had a feeling the story wouldn't end as these men imagined. Because behind his waiter's uniform, Michael carried a secret that no one here suspected. The music softened, giving way to a solemn silence. The bride's father had just proposed a toast in honor of the young couple. The guests raised their glasses, clapping, laughing, celebrating the lavish union. But in a corner of the room, cousins Brian and Ethan, already drunk on champagne, had other plans in mind. Their eyes fell again on Michael, who was passing by with a tray of cups. Brian gave a wicked smile. Hey, you, waiter. Come here. Michael approached, his face neutral. Brian grabbed a glass of champagne and raised it high. Ladies and gentlemen, he shouted in a loud voice, attracting the attention of several tables, here is our star of the evening. A murmur rippled through the room. All eyes turned to Michael, who, despite himself, found himself the center of attention. Ethan stood up and put an arm around her shoulder as if they were old friends. Admit it, he's perfect for the role, right? Always polite, always silent. We should ask him for a little performance. What do you think, Brian? Brian burst out laughing. Oh yeah, good idea. Let him dance for us. Come on, show us what you can do. A heavy silence fell. Michael remained motionless, his tray still balanced in his hands. A few guests stifled embarrassed laughter, others, amused by the scene, encouraged him to obey. An elderly woman sitting nearby frowned and whispered, "This is not appropriate." But Brian ignored him. He snapped his fingers in front of Michael, as one would with a servant. Come on, move. Show us some show. You're not just paid to serve, are you? Michael took a deep breath. His dark gaze swept the room, meeting curious eyes, shifty ones, and a few mocking ones waiting for his reaction. But instead of giving in, he calmly placed his tray on a nearby table. Her silence froze the atmosphere for a moment. Brian approached, his face red with alcohol and pride. He grabbed a glass of champagne and, in front of everyone, slowly tipped it over Michael's shoulder. A horrified murmur ran through the assembly. There you go. Now you're dressed to dance, launches Brian, hilarious. Laughter erupted from the cousins' corner. But elsewhere, the looks changed, some guests seemed shocked by such cruelty. And Michael, despite the blatant humiliation, remained upright, without a word. But behind this apparent calm, a storm was brewing. Champagne still dripped down Michael's shoulder, soaking his black jacket. Brian and Ethan's laughter echoed through the room, contrasting with the awkward silence of many of the guests. You could feel the atmosphere cracking, between those who found the humiliation entertaining and those who looked away, ashamed to witness the spectacle. Michael, however, remained motionless. Not a movement, not a word. Just that heavy silence that was more disturbing than any anger. Then, slowly, he looked up. His dark gaze bored straight into Brian's. A cold, intense gaze that shattered the young man's arrogance. For a split second, Brian felt as if the entire room had shrunk around them, as if nothing existed except this face-to-face. What? He growled, a little unsettled, why are you staring at me like that? Michael didn't answer. His silence weighed like a silent threat. The nearest guests noticed. A woman whispered to her neighbor. This server, he doesn't look ordinary. Ethan, uncomfortable in turn, tried to break the tension. Come on, Brian, ignore him. He pretends to be dignified, but he's just a waiter. Nothing more. But Michael, still motionless, calmly wiped his champagne-soaked shoulder with a napkin. Then he picked up his tray, replaced it under his arm, and in a low but firm voice, said for the first time that evening. You should be careful what you say. A shudder ran through the room. They were only a few words, but spoken with such confidence that they resonated far beyond the small circle of mockers. Several guests sat up, intrigued. Even the groom, Chadwick, sitting on the dais, looked up, surprised to hear the waiter speak like that. Brian burst out into a forced laugh, but his smile trembled slightly. Be careful. Are you threatening us? Michael held her gaze unwaveringly. I'm just warning you. Then he turned away, returned to his duty as if nothing had happened, leaving behind a tense silence and growing whispers. Because now everyone in the room understood one thing, this server was not who they thought he was. The mood at the reception had changed. The guests' easy laughter had turned to murmurs. People were no longer talking about the bride's jewelry or the cut of her dress, but about the black waiter who had dared to speak out. A simple warning, but delivered with a confidence that deeply disturbed those who thought they had everything under control. Brian, annoyed, refused to lose face. His pride, inflated by alcohol and the stares of others, dictated that he hit harder. He banged his fist on the table, making the glasses rattle. "Who do you think you are?" he said in a louder voice than a little employee who thinks he's a king. Ethan stood up in turn, a wicked smile playing on his lips. Brian needs a lesson. These people, when they start to raise their heads, you have to remind them of their place. The sentence, uttered in front of the entire assembly, had the effect of a slap in the face. Some guests nodded, silently approving this contemptuous vision. Others, on the contrary, lowered their eyes, ashamed but too cowardly to intervene. Michael, however, didn't move. His calm was almost unbearable. He moved slowly between the tables, filling a glass here, setting down a tray there, as if nothing were happening. But every movement, every glance, exuded an icy mastery. Brian, exasperated by this silent dignity, decided to go further. He stood up, grabbed a slice of cake from the table, and, in front of everyone, roughly slammed it against Michael's chest. A muffled scream rose from the room. Cream splattered on his black shirt, dripping onto his apron. The laughter started again, louder, more cruel. Ethan, laughing, said, "There you go, now you have something to eat too. No need to go back to your neighborhood to get your dinner." The more sensitive guests were outraged, but no one dared to intervene. Everyone waited for Michael's reaction. He looked down at his soiled shirt. Then, slowly, he raised his head. His dark eyes stared at Brian and Ethan with icy intensity. This time, even the most mocking felt a chill run down their spines. Michael put down his tray, calmly dried his hands with a napkin, and said in a low voice, but perfectly audible throughout the room, "I warned you." A deathly silence fell immediately. Even the groom, Chadwick, frowned. The bride, Samantha, exchanged a worried look with her father. The band had stopped playing. Everyone waited, tense, for what would happen next. Because in that sentence, there was no anger, but a promise. Silence hung in the room, broken only by the clinking of glasses as a nervous guest placed them back on the table. All eyes focused on Michael, who stood motionless, his clothes stained with champagne and cream. Yet in his demeanor, there was neither shame nor submission. Only an icy confidence. Brian, taken aback by this calm reaction, tried to regain control. "What do you mean by, 'I warned you'?" he asked in a voice that was meant to be mocking, but in which a note of concern could be heard. Michael stared straight into his eyes. "Let's say you don't know who you're insulting." A shudder ran through the assembly. Whispers arose. "What is he talking about? It's just a server, right? He looks confident." Ethan burst out laughing to break the tension. "You're bluffing. What do you want us to believe? That you're someone important? You're in uniform, man. You're nothing more than an employee." Michael gave a small smile, but it wasn't amused. It was a smile heavy with meaning. He slipped a hand into his inside pocket and pulled out a small black object, a refined leather case. He opened it slowly, revealing an official card. An even louder murmur arose. Engraved in golden letters, it read, "Department of Justice, United States of America." Brian blanched. Ethan took a step back, his laughter catching in his throat. Several guests exchanged incredulous glances. The bride put her hand to her mouth. The bride's father, an influential businessman, frowned uncomfortably. Michael closed the case and put it away calmly, as if that simple gesture explained everything. "I'm not here by chance," he said in a calm voice, "and believe me, your faces, your words, your actions. I will remember them." There was total silence. Even the orchestra, which had tentatively tried to resume, stopped again. In that suspended moment, one truth was clear to everyone: this waiter wasn't just another employee. He belonged to something much bigger, and his eyes clearly said that those who had just humiliated him would pay the price. The reveal of the official card had frozen the room. Not a single laugh, not a single word, only troubled looks and hushed murmurs. Some guests seemed uncomfortable, others intrigued, but everyone knew they had just witnessed something unexpected. Michael, impassive, had resumed his post as if nothing had happened, pouring wine at a nearby table. But every gesture, every movement now, had a different aura. He no longer resembled a simple waiter. He exuded an invisible authority, a silent force that disturbed those who had sought to humiliate him. Yet pride is stronger than reason. Brian, his face red with shame, could not accept that he had been publicly destabilized by a man he considered inferior. His ego could not bear the thought that the entire room had seen that cold stare silence him. He leaned towards Ethan and whispered, "We can't let him get away with this. If we back down now, he wins." Ethan nodded, his eyes shining with drunken cruelty. "So we break it. In front of everyone." They stood up again, attracting everyone's attention. Brian snapped his fingers at Michael. "You! Come back here. We're not finished." Michael turned slowly toward them, his tray still in his hand. His calm, measured gait echoed like a silent challenge. Ethan picked up a cup of red wine from the table and handed it to Michael. "You pretend to be important? Very well. Drink with us. Drink to our health, if you want to prove to us that you're not just a flunky." A murmur ran through the room. The humiliation was taking another turn. They wanted to reduce him to the rank of buffoon, to force him to make a fool of himself in front of everyone. Michael stared at the outstretched glass. His face remained impassive. Then he looked up and locked his dark gaze with Ethan's. "You really have no idea what you're doing." The tone of his voice made several guests shudder. It sounded like he was announcing a verdict. But Brian burst into a forced laugh, trying to break the tension. "Stop acting mysterious. Do you think you can intimidate us with your little card?" Michael didn't answer. He gently placed his tray on the nearest table. His gaze slid toward the stage, where the groom and bride were watching, visibly uncomfortable. Then he returned to Brian and Ethan, his expression icy again. "You have just crossed a line that you will bitterly regret." A heavy silence fell. The cousins were still smiling, but their laughter had lost its sparkle. A glimmer of worry was beginning to appear in their eyes. For everyone now felt that Michael was not just a man with a badge, but a man capable of bringing down empires. The entire room held its breath. Michael, still standing straight, his clothes stained but his posture unwavering, seemed to have taken invisible control of the evening. Even without raising his voice, he imposed an authority that silenced even the most arrogant. Brian, still standing, waved the glass of red wine in front of him to save face. "You want to impress us with your airs? Show everyone what you really are. Because all I see is a waiter with a badge he probably stole." A murmur of indignation rose in the room. Several guests began to whisper louder. "Stolen? But this card looked authentic." And his calm, "It's not that of an imposter." Michael sighed, like a teacher tired of correcting an ignorant student. Then, slowly, he reached back into his inside pocket and this time pulled out not a card, but a silver-plated badge that reflected the light from the chandeliers. The engraved letters shone for all to see. Federal Bureau of Investigation. A gasp rippled through the room. Several guests stood instinctively, as if the mere sight of the insignia compelled them to show respect. The bride, Samantha, put her hand to her mouth and let out a small, muffled gasp. The groom, Chadwick, blanched on his platform. As for the bride's father, he sank back in his seat, his gaze troubled. Michael finally spoke, his voice calm, clear, but heavy with contained threat. "I'm not here to pour your drinks. I'm here on a mission. A federal investigation is underway into some of you. And believe me, what you just did tonight will be etched in my records." An icy silence fell over the room. Each guest suddenly wondered, what if he was watching me? Brian and Ethan stood there, pale and frozen, unable to find a reply. Their arrogance had just been extinguished like a candle in a storm. Michael put away his badge and continued, in a calm but implacable tone. You thought you were humiliating a waiter. But tonight, it's your own masks that are falling. And believe me, justice never forgets. The impact of his words resonated throughout the room. For the first time, the wealthy who dominated the event felt vulnerable. The flash of the FBI badge still lingered in everyone's mind like a clap of thunder. No one laughed anymore. Glasses rattled in some guests' hands, others exchanged nervous glances. The music had finally died down, and the lavish party had taken on the air of a silent courtroom. Michael looked around the room. Every guest felt his gaze weigh like a sentence. Then he slowly walked toward the central table, his deep voice resonating without the need to shout. You thought today would be a celebration of your wealth and power. But behind those gilded walls, how many of you are hiding secrets? A murmur ran through the assembly. Michael continued, implacable. Monsieur Harold Bennett, he said, pointing at a man in a grey suit who owns several businesses, your name appears in several cases involving embezzlement of public funds. Did you think no one would notice? The man turned pale. His wife reached for his arm, but he remained frozen. Michael then turned his gaze to an elegant woman, covered in diamonds. Ms. Claire Richmond. Behind your charities lies a vast money laundering network. I wonder what your charities would think if the truth came out. The woman dropped her champagne glass, which shattered into 1,000 pieces on the floor. Guests were beginning to stir. Some were quietly getting up to leave, others were whispering to each other in panic. Finally, Michael turned back to the stage where the groom and bride were standing. His eyes fixed on Chadwick Moore. And you, Mr. Groom? Do you really think your dubious dealings with certain foreign companies would remain invisible? The bride, Samantha, blanched at this. She looked at her new husband in shock. Chadwick, his lips trembling, tried to protest. This is not the time, you can't. Michael interrupted him sharply. Justice does not choose the moment. It chooses the truth. A heavy silence followed. The guests realized they were no longer at a party, but in a room where everyone could be exposed. The rich, who thought they dominated with their money and arrogance, were now the accused in an invisible trial, led by the very person they had humiliated just minutes earlier. The room vibrated with palpable tension. The guests, frozen, stared at Michael with a mixture of fear and fascination. The shards of shattered glass and hushed whispers testified that the balance had shifted. It was no longer they, the arrogant rich, who dictated the rules. Brian and Ethan stood side by side, pale and trembling. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by a mixture of disbelief and fear. Every word Michael said weighed like a hammer blow to their egos. Michael walked towards them, his dark gaze locked with theirs. You too, you thought you could humiliate someone, make fun of their dignity, and that nothing would happen to you? Brian tried to smile, but his laugh was weak and forced. It was just a joke. Nothing serious. Michael shook his head slowly. A joke? You humiliated someone in front of dozens of witnesses. And you had no idea what you were doing. Ethan tented d'intervenir, mais Michael leva la main. Silence. What you just did does not go unpunished. So, calmly, Michael took a small notebook out of his pocket and handed it to a witness, a journalist present at the event to cover the wedding. Everything is recorded. Insults, gestures, your mockery, everything will be examined by the office. Your families, your businesses, your affairs, nothing will escape justice. Brian took a step back, his face ashen. You can't do that, he stammered. Oh yes, Michael replied, his chilling calm accentuating his words, you thought you could play with me, but you never understood one thing, I am not who you think I am. Ethan tried to look away, but Michael stepped forward again, stopping right in front of them. And tonight, what you have sown, you will reap. An absolute silence fell over the room. Every guest felt the balance of power shift. The wealthy, who thought they controlled everything, were now at the mercy of a man they had believed inferior, but who had just shown them that dignity and justice always trump arrogance and money. Michael then stepped back, resuming his service as if nothing had happened, leaving behind a stifling silence and cushions of fear and shame. The humiliating cousins exchanged a look, finally understanding the magnitude of their mistake. Their arrogance had been their downfall. The room was frozen. Every guest held their breath, unable to look away from Michael. The server they had thought inferior had turned the tables with a mastery and authority that left everyone stunned. Brian and Ethan, still center stage, were trembling. Their arrogance had turned to pure fear. They finally understood that their mockery and contempt would not go without consequences. Michael placed the last tray on a table and took a step back. His voice, calm and firm, echoed one last time. "You thought your names, your fortunes, your titles would be enough to protect you, but tonight, you learned a lesson you will never forget." The murmurs turned into frightened whispers. Some guests hurried toward the exit, too ashamed or afraid to stay. Others looked at each other in disbelief and trembling, realizing that justice was not an empty word. Michael, without a backward glance, headed for the exit. Each step he took seemed to absorb the arrogance of the room and leave behind a deathly silence. The shards of crystal and broken cups still sparkled under the lights, silent witnesses to the reverse humiliation. Before going through the door, he turned around one last time and gave his cousins an icy look. "Remember this, those you despise may be the ones judging you tomorrow. And trust me, justice always comes." Then he left, leaving behind a complete silence, mingled with fear and shame. The wealthy who had thought they had everything under control now had to face the price of their arrogance and contempt. This wedding, supposed to be a celebration of wealth and influence, had turned into an impromptu tribunal, and Michael Johnson, the humiliated waiter, the unimpeachable judge. From that day on, no one dared to underestimate his dignity, his calm, or his power.